My name is Mason, a 33-year-old construction worker from Phoenix, who has been busting my back since 16. Last month, I hit the jackpot $47 million after taxes. Instead of shouting it from rooftops, I decided to keep quiet and test my family. You see, when I actually needed help before most disappeared. Now with this secret fortune, I created a fake crisis to see who would step up. The results shattered everything I thought I knew about family. Before I share how this all went down, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you will want to see who was real and who was just playing family. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Phoenix, where nothing was particularly fancy, but we had enough to get by at least until my parents split when I was 12. The divorce hit our family like a wrecking ball, leaving my mom to raise me and my sister Ashley on her own. Mom worked 2 jobs, administrative assistant during the day and waitressing some nights. There were stretches when the electricity would flicker before payments went through, and Christmas gifts came from discount bins. Watching her struggle taught me the value of hard work early on. By 16, I was stocking shelves at a local grocery store after school and on weekends. My first paycheck felt like winning the lottery back then, $278. That I split between helping mom with bills and saving for a beat-up truck I eventually bought at 17. I was never the college type, so after high school, I took a job as a construction laborer. The work was brutal in the Arizona heat, but the pay was decent, and I found satisfaction in creating something tangible with my hands. Over 15 years, I worked my way up from carrying materials and digging trenches to becoming a foreman with a crew of 12 men under me. The job paid about $67,000 a year, enough to rent a decent 1-bedroom apartment and drive a reliable truck, but not enough for luxury. 3 years ago, a steel beam shifted during a commercial project and caught me across the lower back. The injury required surgery and 3 months of recovery, during which my savings evaporated like morning dew in the desert heat. Then 6 months ago, a drunk driver plowed into my truck at an intersection. I walked away with minor injuries, but my truck was totaled. The insurance payout covered about half of what I needed for a replacement, forcing me to finance the rest and adding another monthly payment to my budget. My family situation had always been complicated. Dad remarried about 5 years after the divorce to Heather, a woman only 11 years older than me. They moved to Scottsdale and embraced a lifestyle that seemed designed to erase the memory of his former middle-class existence. Our conversations became increasingly shallow weather sports and carefully edited life updates that avoided any hint of financial reality. Ashley, my sister, married her high school sweetheart Brian, and they had 2 kids, Emma and Tyler. What looked perfect on Facebook was anything but behind closed doors. Brian lost his job twice in 5 years and developed a gambling habit he thought nobody noticed. Ashley worked as a nurse and carried their family financially, but the strain showed in the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her voice during our weekly calls. Mom never really recovered financially after the divorce. She moved into a smaller house in a less desirable neighborhood and cycled through a series of administrative jobs. By the time I was in my late 20s, I found myself helping her with mortgage payments every few months when she would call in tears about potentially losing her home. The extended family had their own dynamics. Aunt Judith, my mother's sister, had married a successful real estate developer and lived in a gated community in Paradise Valley. Their 3-story house had a pool with a view of Camelback Mountain, and she drove a new Mercedes every 2 years. Despite her wealth, Judith had perfected the art of being unavailable whenever anyone needed financial help, though she never missed an opportunity to dispense unsolicited financial advice. Uncle Robert was the black sheep of the family, my dad's younger brother, who never quite found his footing in life. He bounced between jobs as a salesman, handyman, and occasional musician. Despite his perpetual state of near poverty, he was the first to offer help in non-financial ways, helping with moves, fixing cars, or just listening without judgment over a beer. My cousins formed another layer of complicated relationships. Derek, Aunt Judith's son, had borrowed $3,000 from me 3 years ago when he was between jobs, promising to pay me back within 6 months. So far, I had received $500 and a lot of excuses. Ryan and Tiffany, Uncle Robert's kids, were friendly but distant, caught up in their own struggles to launch adult lives with limited resources. My own financial struggles came to a head after my back surgery 2 years ago. The insurance covered 80% of the procedure, but I was still left with nearly $15,000 in medical bills. I had to drain my modest savings and still came up short. When I finally swallowed my pride and asked Aunt Judith for a loan, she declined with a lecture about the importance of maintaining an emergency fund and suggested I learn to live within my means. This from a woman whose kitchen renovation cost more than my annual salary. Cousin Derek never fully repaid his loan, but always had money for weekend trips to Vegas that he documented extensively on Instagram. My father and Heather sent a fruit basket to the hospital, but were going through some investments when I hinted at needing financial help during recovery. Only Uncle Robert showed up, consistently driving me to physical therapy appointments, bringing home-cooked meals, and once slipping a $100 bill into my jacket pocket despite his own precarious finances. He never mentioned it, and when I tried to thank him later, he changed the subject, as if embarrassed by his own generosity. These were the people I thought I knew. A mixture of strained bonds, obligatory connections, and a few genuine relationships. Little did I know that a random stop at a convenience store would give me the power to see them all with painfully clear vision. It was a Friday in late September when my life changed forever. I had just finished a grueling 10-hour day supervising a foundation pour that had gone wrong twice because of faulty concrete deliveries. My back was aching from the physical strain, and my throat was raw from shouting instructions over the machinery noise. I stopped at the Circle K near my apartment to grab a cold Gatorade and some ibuprofen. The line at the register was 5 people deep. Payday meant everyone was stopping for beer and lottery tickets. I normally avoided gambling, having seen too many guys on the crew throw away substantial portions of their paychecks on scratchers and draw games. But something about that day, maybe exhaustion breaking down my usual resistance, made me add a quick pick Powerball ticket to my purchase when I finally reached the counter. The clerk handed me the ticket along with my change, and I stuffed it into my wallet without a second thought. I spent that evening with an ice pack on my back, flipping through mindless television shows and dozing off intermittently. The local news came on at 10, and I was half watching when the lottery drawing segment began. I remembered my ticket and fished it out of my wallet, expecting the usual disappointment. The first number matched, then the second. By the third match, I was sitting upright, ice pack forgotten. Fourth and fifth numbers matches. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples. Then the Powerball number 19. I looked down at my ticket. 19. I must have checked the numbers 20 times, convinced I was misreading something, or that I had an old ticket from a previous drawing. I went online and checked the official lottery website. The numbers were unmistakable. I had hit the jackpot. The prize was advertised at $87 million. After taxes and choosing the lump sum option, I would walk away with approximately $47 million. The amount was so enormous, it seemed abstract, like monopoly money, rather than actual wealth. That night, I lay awake until dawn, my mind racing through possibilities. I could pay off my debts, buy a house outright, help my sister set up college funds for my niece and nephew, travel the world, start my own construction company. The options were limitless. But mixed with the exhilaration was a creeping anxiety. I had read about lottery winners whose lives imploded after their win family disputes, frivolous lawsuits, substance abuse, bankruptcy, and even murder. More personally, I thought about how my relationships might change. Would my father suddenly want to reconnect more meaningfully? Would Aunt Judith treat me differently when I had more money than she did? Would Cousin Derek magically remember the loan he had yet to repay? The thought of everyone coming at me with open hands and manufactured affection made me physically nauseous. By morning, I had made a decision I would tell no one about the win until I had protected myself legally and financially. And perhaps more importantly, until I understood who in my life was truly there for me. 3 days later, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Instead of supervising a site, I met with a financial advisor recommended by the Lottery Commission. Martin Friedman had gray hair, penetrating eyes, and a direct manner I appreciated. He specialized in sudden wealth management and had worked with several previous lottery winners. The first rule, he told me over coffee in his downtown office, is discretion. The second is protection. The third is patience. Under his guidance, I established an anonymous LLC to claim the winnings, Arizona being one of the states that allows lottery winners to maintain privacy. We set up accounts at 3 different banks, created a comprehensive investment portfolio, and drafted a financial plan that would ensure the money lasted a lifetime, even with reasonable expenditures. We discussed philanthropy tax strategies and how to eventually tell select family members without creating dependency. What Martin could not advise me on, however, was how to determine who deserved to know about my windfall and potentially benefit from it. That evening, alone in my apartment, I thought about my family's behavior during previous financial crises in my life. I remembered who had stepped up and who had stepped back. An idea began to form a test that would reveal true character before I revealed true wealth. The plan was simple but potentially devastating. I would create a fictional financial emergency and ask various family members for help. The scenario needed to be serious enough to warrant significant assistance, but not so extreme as to seem implausible. After consideration, I settled on a layoff story. Construction work is cyclical, and companies frequently reduce workforce during slow periods. I crafted the details carefully. The company had lost a major contract, leading to immediate staff reductions. I had been caught in the cut, despite my seniority, because of a clash with a new project manager. Unemployment benefits would take weeks to kick in, and I was facing both rent and the final payment on my medical bills from the back surgery, a perfect storm that required about $5,000 to weather. I decided on specific amounts to ask from different family members based on what I knew of their financial situations. $2,000 from Mom, who struggled but had recently mentioned a small inheritance from a great aunt. $3,000 from Dad and Heather, who frequently posted about luxury purchases. $5,000 from Aunt Judith, the wealthiest family member. $1,000 each from cousins Derek and Ryan. And whatever he could manage from Uncle Robert, though I expected nothing given his circumstances. I would ask my sister Ashley for $1,500, knowing her own financial strain. The request would be made over 2 weeks, giving me time to gauge not just initial reactions but follow-through. I would track responses, excuses, and most tellingly social media activity that might contradict claims of financial inability. Part of me felt guilty about the deception, but I rationalized it as a necessary insight before life-changing decisions about sharing wealth. I was not just testing generosity, I was testing authenticity, reliability, and whether their treatment of me was conditional on what I could provide rather than who I was. The stage was set for a revelation, but not the one my family would be expecting. I began implementing my test on a Tuesday evening by calling my mother. Her voice brightened when she saw my name on caller ID, but quickly shifted to concern when I explained my fictional situation. I could hear her moving from the living room to the kitchen, her usual habit when conversations turned serious. Laid off. But you were just telling me about that big hospital project, she said, confusion evident in her voice. That project manager I mentioned, Johnson, he brought in his own crew, leads from his previous company. I was the last senior guy from before he arrived. The lie felt strange on my tongue, but I pushed forward. Mom, I hate to ask, but I am in a real bind with rent due next week and the final payment on my medical bills. Any chance you could help with about $2,000? I can pay you back once unemployment kicks in. There was a long pause, followed by a heavy sigh. Oh, Mason, you know I would if I could. That inheritance money is already allocated for replacing the furnace before winter hits. Her voice had the practiced tone of someone who has delivered disappointing news many times. Let me see what I can move around and call you back tomorrow. Have you tried your father? I told her I was planning to call him next, and ended the conversation with her promise to figure something out. An hour later, I drove to Ashley's house for dinner, a standing weekly arrangement where I would deliver my request in person. Ashley opened the door with my 4-year-old niece Emma clinging to her leg. The house smelled of spaghetti sauce and garlic bread, simple but comforting. Brian was apparently working late again, though I sometimes wondered if working included stops at the Desert Diamond Casino. After dinner, and once the kids were occupied with a movie in the living room, I explained my situation to Ashley at the kitchen table. Her face fell as I spoke, genuine concern washing over her features. Mason, this is awful timing, she said. reaching across to squeeze my hand. Brian's hours just got cut back again, and we are barely making the mortgage. I have maybe 300 in my personal savings I could give you right now. Tears welled in her eyes. I feel terrible I cannot do more. You have helped us so many times. The authenticity of her distress made me regret including her in the test, but I needed complete data. I assured her that even 300 would help, and changed the subject to Emma's upcoming dance recital. The next day, I drove to Scottsdale to meet my father and Heather for lunch, a quarterly obligation that usually left me feeling diminished. They selected a new bistro, where the menu had no prices listed, always a bad sign for my budget. Dad ordered a $70 bottle of wine before I even had a chance to explain my purpose in suggesting the lunch. When I finally described my fictional layoff and financial situation, my father's expression shifted from shock to something resembling disappointment, as though my unemployment reflected poorly on him personally. Son, the construction industry is always up and down. You should have established a more substantial emergency fund by now. He took a long sip of his wine. Heather and I have significant capital tied up in investments right now. Very illiquid situation. Heather nodded in vigorous agreement. The market timing is just terrible right now to withdraw anything. She reached across to pat my hand in a gesture that felt rehearsed. But we can certainly connect you with some of Tom's contacts in the industry. I am sure someone is hiring. I thanked them for their help and declined their offer to cover lunch, a small act of pride that visibly relieved them. As I drove home, I received a text from my father. Tough love is still love, son. This will build character. I nearly drove off the road reading it. The following day, I met Uncle Robert at a coffee shop near his apartment. He arrived wearing a faded Diamondbacks cap and the same denim jacket he had owned for at least a decade. I ordered us both coffee and muffins, knowing his budget rarely accommodated such luxuries. When I explained my situation, he listened without interruption, his weathered face growing increasingly concerned. When I finished, he did not hesitate. I got about $850 in savings right now. It is yours, no questions asked. He pulled out his checkbook, a relic few people still used. I wish it was more, Mason. You deserve better breaks than you get. I felt a lump forming in my throat. Robert, I cannot take your savings. You are on a fixed income. Family helps family, he said, simply writing the check. When I was at my lowest after the divorce, your mom let me sleep on her couch for 3 months. Never made me feel like a charity case. Nobody gets through life alone, kid. I accepted the check with mixed emotions, genuine gratitude for his generosity and guilt about my deception. Before we parted, he added, my spare bedroom is not much, but if you need a place to crash until things turn around, it is yours. That evening, I called Aunt Judith. Her husband Gregory answered and sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me, until I asked to speak with Judith about a personal matter. When my aunt came on the line, her voice had the artificial warmth of someone preparing to maintain appearances while delivering a rejection. I explained my situation, emphasizing that I had exhausted all other options and was asking for a loan rather than a gift. I outlined a repayment plan once my employment situation stabilized. Mason. She began, her voice shifting into lecture mode. This is precisely why Gregory and I have always emphasized financial literacy with Derek. Unexpected expenses and job transitions are facts of adult life. I understand that, Aunt Judith, but sometimes circumstances align in ways that I simply cannot enable poor planning, she interrupted. It would not be good for your long-term financial education. Have you considered rideshare driving in the evenings? Derek made quite a respectable side income doing that before he joined Gregory's firm. The conversation ended with her promising to email me links to some financial literacy courses and budget templates. No offer of financial help was forthcoming, though I knew from Ashley that Judith had recently spent $30,000 on a kitchen renovation. The next round of requests went to my cousins. Derek responded to my text with a phone call that went straight to his voicemail twice before I caught him on the third attempt. His voice had the hurried quality of someone fitting an obligation between more important activities. Mason, bro, this is brutal timing. Allie and I just put a deposit down on our Cabo trip next month, non-refundable, and I am still paying off my MBA loans. There was no mention of the $3,000 he still owed me. Let me see if I can move some things around and get back to you. Ryan, who worked as an IT specialist, responded with genuine regret that he had just financed a new car and was completely tapped out, but offered to help update my resume and LinkedIn profile. Tiffany promised to ask her husband if they could spare anything from their savings but never called back. Over the next week, I observed a disturbing pattern on social media. My mother posted photos of a designer purse she had treated herself to after years of sacrifice. Dad and Heather checked in at a luxury resort in Sedona for a much-needed weekend retreat. Aunt Judith shared photos of her new Sub-Zero refrigerator, describing it as an essential investment in our home's value. Most painful was Cousin Derek posting pictures from a concert with fourth-row seats, with the caption, "Sometimes you just have to live in the moment." This came 2 days after telling me he could not afford to help because of tight finances. The only follow-up came from my mother, who called to explain that she had reviewed her finances and could only offer $500 right now, accompanying this with a 20-minute monologue about her own financial stresses and how difficult her life had been since the divorce. She never mentioned the new purse. Uncle Robert, meanwhile, showed up at my apartment, unannounced on Saturday morning with 2 bags of groceries and an envelope containing an additional $100 in cash. "Found some bottles to recycle and picked up an extra shift helping the super at my building," he explained when I expressed surprise. "The groceries are nothing fancy, but I remember you saying you liked that cereal with the almonds." I invited him in for coffee, and we spent 2 hours talking about everything except money baseball prospects for the Diamondbacks next season, a documentary he had watched about deep-sea creatures, and stories about my grandfather that I had never heard before. After he left, I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling through the social media posts of family members who had claimed financial inability to help, feeling a complex mixture of anger, disappointment, and strange clarity. The test was revealing exactly what I had suspected, but had never wanted to confirm. For most of my family, support was conditional, convenient, and ultimately hollow. Only Uncle Robert, the family member with the least to give financially, had demonstrated genuine care without expectation of return. It was a painful revelation, but one that would ultimately guide decisions worth millions. The days following my test became increasingly difficult to navigate emotionally. I found myself sitting alone in my apartment each evening, scrolling through years of family photos on my phone, reinterpreting each smile and embrace through the lens of what I now knew. Birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings, and casual Sunday dinners all seemed like elaborate performances, rather than genuine connections. I created a folder on my computer where I methodically saved screenshots of social media posts that directly contradicted the excuses I had been given. Dad and Heather at a wine tasting event with a caption about investing in experiences. Mom showing off her new haircut and color at an upscale salon. Aunt Judith's cruise booking confirmation she had shared to inspire summer planning. And Derek's new golf clubs prominently displayed against the backdrop of an exclusive country club. The evidence mounted, and with it my anger deepened. These were not just white lies to avoid helping, they were deliberate choices to prioritize luxuries while family struggled, or at least while they thought family struggled. The lowest moment came unexpectedly when I stopped by my mother's house to drop off some mail that had been delivered to my apartment by mistake. I had planned a quick handoff at the door, but she insisted I come in for iced tea. As I sat at her kitchen counter, her phone rang, and she stepped into the living room to take the call. Her voice carried clearly down the hallway. "I know, Marjorie, it is always something with him," she was saying to her friend. "First the back surgery, now this job thing. I raised him to be more responsible than this. Tom thinks I enable him too much." I set my glass down silently and left before she returned, a cold hollowness spreading through my chest. The mother who had told me she wished she could help more was complaining about my supposed irresponsibility to her friend, parroting my father's assessment of me as though I were a disappointing investment rather than her son. 2 days later, I visited Ashley to help fix a leaking faucet in her bathroom, a standing offer of brotherly assistance that predated my lottery win. While searching for a wrench in the garage, I overheard her conversation with Brian through the open window. "I am worried about Mason," she was saying. He has always been so reliable, but asking for money like this. I wonder if there is something else going on he is not telling us about. Like what Brian's voice had an edge of suspicion. I do not know. Gambling. Maybe Dad always said he was too impulsive with money. The betrayal from Ashley hit hardest. She had been my closest ally in the family, the one person I thought understood me without judgment. Now she was entertaining the idea that I had a hidden addiction, rather than accepting that sometimes bad luck hits good people. That night was my emotional rock bottom. I sat on my balcony with a bottle of whiskey, watching the lights of Phoenix spread out below as the desert night enveloped the city. I had $47 million in carefully structured accounts and trusts, yet I felt more alone than when I had been struggling paycheck to paycheck. I typed out a group text to the entire family, revealing my lottery win and their collective failure of character, my thumb hovering over the send button for a full minute before I deleted the draft. Revenge might feel momentarily satisfying, but it would not heal the deeper wound of realizing how conditional family bonds truly were. The only bright spot in this dark emotional landscape was Uncle Robert. I had learned from Ryan that Robert had skipped refilling his blood pressure medication to help me, a dangerous choice for a man with his medical history. The check he had given me came with a handwritten note I had initially overlooked. Mason, tough times show us who we really are. You are a good man who helps others without keeping score. The world needs more like you. This is not charity. It is an investment in the kind of person I am proud to call family. Robert. Those words became my emotional anchor in the following days. While others had revealed the transactional nature of their affection, Robert had demonstrated what unconditional support looked like. The stark contrast helped clarify my path forward. I spent an entire Sunday walking through Papago Park, the distinctive red sandstone formations, providing a timeless perspective on my very modern dilemma. By sunset, sitting near the iconic hole in the rock, I reached a decision point that felt like emerging from a dark tunnel. The money had not created the problems in my family relationships, it had merely illuminated what was already there. I could not control how others chose to behave, but I could control my response. I would not use wealth as a weapon to punish those who had failed my test, but I would use it as a tool to build a life aligned with my values. More importantly, I would recognize and honor the people who had demonstrated genuine care, starting with Uncle Robert. His generosity from a place of scarcity had shown more character than Aunt Judith's wealth ever had. With this clarity came a sense of peace. I was no longer angry, just resolved. The revelation of my fortune would happen on my terms, with full awareness of what each relationship truly was. Some bonds would strengthen, others would fade, but none would continue under false pretenses. As I drove home that evening, I called Martin, my financial advisor, to set up a meeting. It was time to move from protection mode to strategic revelation. The test was complete, and the results, though painful, were undeniable. Now I needed to prepare for the next phase, showing my cards in a way that would establish clear boundaries for the future. After consulting with Martin, I decided that revealing my lottery win required careful staging. We settled on hosting a small family gathering under the pretense of thanking everyone for their support during my difficult time. Martin suggested a private room at Maggiano's, upscale enough to feel special, but not so extravagant as to raise suspicions before my announcement. I sent out invitations to a Sunday afternoon appreciation lunch, carefully wording the message to suggest I had received good news about a job opportunity and wanted to express gratitude to my family. Most responded quickly, perhaps relieved that I would no longer be a financial concern. In the days leading up to the gathering, I experienced waves of anxiety, followed by moments of complete calm. I rehearsed what I would say, anticipating different reactions, and planning my responses. Martin had prepared a folder with documentation of the win and preliminary information about the family foundation. I intended to establish visual proof that would eliminate any doubt about the reality of my new circumstances. The morning of the lunch, I dressed carefully in clothes that would not signal any change in my financial status. Dark jeans, a button-down shirt I had worn to countless family functions, and the watch my grandfather had left me. I arrived early to inspect the private dining room and briefed the staff about the confidential nature of our gathering. Family members arrived in predictable fashion. Mom came 15 minutes early, fussing about the table arrangement and asking the server about gluten-free options. Dad and Heather arrived exactly on time, him checking his phone repeatedly and her scanning the room as if assessing its worthiness. Ashley and Brian came with the kids, who were promised tablets to keep them occupied during adult talk. Aunt Judith and Uncle Gregory made a characteristically grand entrance, while Uncle Robert slipped in quietly and took a seat in the corner. The cousins arrived in a cluster, comparing parking spots and drink plans for later that evening. As appetizers were served, conversation remained superficial weather complaints, traffic updates, and generic questions about each other's week. Several family members asked carefully worded questions about my job situation, their relief evident when I mentioned good news was coming. Once everyone had been served their main course, I stood and tapped my water glass with a spoon. The conversations quieted, and all eyes turned to me expectantly. Thank you all for coming today. I began, my heart pounding despite my preparation. As you know, I have been going through a difficult financial time recently, and I reached out to many of you for help. Several uncomfortable glances were exchanged around the table. Before I share my news, I want to acknowledge how challenging it can be when family members ask for financial assistance. It puts everyone in a difficult position. Dad nodded vigorously, clearly anticipating an announcement that would absolve him of any responsibility to help. The reason I gathered you here today is that I have not been entirely truthful with you all. I paused, registering the confusion spreading across their faces. 3 weeks ago, I won the Powerball jackpot. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a fork clinked against a plate, not a chair creaked. Then came the eruption gasps, exclamations, Brian, dropping his drink, Aunt Judith's hand flying to her throat. That is not possible, my father finally said, his voice hoarse. I nodded to the server who brought over the folder Martin had prepared. I opened it and placed the lottery commission documentation on the table. $47 million after taxes, I continued calmly. I formed an anonymous LLC to claim the prize and have been working with financial advisors to establish long-term security. But the layoff, asking for money. My mother's voice trailed off as understanding began to dawn. There was no layoff, I confirmed. After winning, I decided to conduct a test. Having experienced actual financial need in the past and seeing varying levels of support, I wanted to understand the true nature of our family relationships before revealing my win. The stunned silence returned this time with an undercurrent of dawning horror as family members began to realize the implications. You lied to us? Aunt Judith's indignation came first, her voice sharp with self-righteous anger. I created a fictional scenario, I corrected calmly, one that revealed some uncomfortable truths about our family dynamics. I removed the folder of screenshots from my bag and placed it on the table without opening it. While most of you explained you could not help me financially, which is your right, many of you continued spending freely on luxuries. Dad, you and Heather took a weekend trip to Sedona the day after telling me all your money was tied up in investments. Mom, you bought a designer purse while telling me you were struggling to help with $500. Derek, you attended a concert with expensive seats while still owing me $3,000 from a loan 3 years ago. The screenshots remained closed, a silent threat of public evidence. Mason, this is completely inappropriate. My father sputtered, his face flushing with anger. You cannot play games with people's lives to satisfy some personal curiosity. It was not a game, I replied evenly. It was a moment of clarity before making decisions that will affect all our lives going forward. I needed to see who you really are when you think I have nothing to offer. The reactions around the table ranged from outrage to embarrassment to calculation. Aunt Judith's expression had already shifted from indignation to speculation, her eyes narrowing as she reassessed my value in her world. I was going to help you, Mom insisted tearfully. I told you I was trying to find the money. While complaining to Marjorie about how irresponsible I am, I asked quietly. Her face crumpled, confirming I had indeed heard correctly. Through all this, Uncle Robert remained silent in his corner seat, watching the scene unfold with sad understanding in his eyes. Robert, I said, turning to face him directly, you gave me your entire savings and offered your home without hesitation. You skipped your medication to help me. My voice caught unexpectedly. That is why you will be the first person I help with this money. I turned back to the table at large. I am not sharing this news to hurt anyone or to hold grudges. But my eyes are open now about the conditional nature of most of our relationships. So what are you saying? Derek asked, his voice a mixture of defensiveness and calculation. You are cutting us off because we could not write blank checks. No, I replied. I am establishing boundaries based on what I now understand about each relationship. This fortune does not obligate me to anyone, nor does it erase the patterns of behavior I have observed over years. I outlined my plans clearly: a family educational trust for the younger generation, including Ashley's children, structured so the money could only be used for legitimate educational expenses, assistance for my mother's house to be placed in a trust that prevented its sale for profit, and a significant gift for Uncle Robert that would ensure his medical needs and housing security for life. For everyone else, I concluded our relationships will continue based on genuine connection rather than financial expectation. I will not be responding to direct requests for money, but I will be establishing a family council to evaluate legitimate needs if they arise. You cannot just dictate terms to your family. My father protested, though, with notably less conviction than before. I am not dictating anything, I corrected him. I am making informed choices about my resources based on demonstrated character. Everyone here remains free to choose the nature of their relationship with me going forward. As the initial shock subsided, the true colors began to show more clearly. Dad and Heather shifted quickly to congratulatory mode, with Heather suggesting they celebrate properly at their country club. Aunt Judith mentioned her friend who specializes in wealth management for select clients. Derek began an awkward apology about the unpaid loan that sounded rehearsed. I thanked the group for coming, paid the bill, and indicated the gathering was concluded. As family members filtered out, some shell-shocked, others already mentally spending my money, I asked Uncle Robert to stay behind. Once we were alone, he looked at me with a mixture of pride and sadness. You did not have to do this, he said simply. The test or the revelation, I asked. Either, but I understand why you did, he sighed deeply. Money does not change people, Mason. It just amplifies who they already are. In that moment, I realized that this quiet wisdom, not the financial assistance, was the true gift I had received from Uncle Robert all along. The weeks following my revelation were a masterclass in human adaptation. Family members who had been exposed in my test worked through stages that resembled grief denial about the significance of their actions, anger at being tricked, bargaining with attempts to reframe their previous behavior, depression when they realized the relationship had fundamentally changed, and finally, varying degrees of acceptance. My phone became a battlefield of text messages and voicemails, each with their own agenda. Mom called daily, alternating between tearful apologies and subtle guilt trips about family loyalty. Dad sent links to investment opportunities that we could explore together, while Heather suggested family therapy to heal these unfortunate misunderstandings. Aunt Judith sent a formal apology letter that read like a business proposal, outlining how her connections could protect and enhance my new wealth. Derek repaid his outstanding loan with interest within 48 hours of the revelation lunch. Ryan and Tiffany reached out with genuine congratulations, unmarred by requests or expectations, which I found refreshingly honest. Ashley called only once, a tearful conversation where she apologized for doubting my character and asked for nothing except understanding. I responded to each communication based on my new boundaries. For those seeking access to my fortune, I remained polite but firm about the structures I had established. For those showing genuine remorse or connection, I offered pathways to rebuild trust gradually. The most meaningful moment came when I invited Uncle Robert to dinner at Durant's, an old-school Phoenix steakhouse, known for its red leather booths and exceptional service. I had made arrangements in advance with the management for absolute privacy in their back room. Robert arrived in what was clearly a newly purchased shirt, his thinning hair carefully combed, looking both excited and uncomfortable in the upscale surroundings. After we ordered, I handed him an envelope containing documentation of what I had arranged for him. A trust fund of $500,000, structured to provide monthly income while preserving the principal: comprehensive health, insurance for life, and the deed to a modest but well-maintained 2-bedroom condo in a secure community near his favorite park. He stared at the papers in silence, then carefully set them down and removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. "I cannot accept this, Mason," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "It is not charity," I told him, echoing his own words back to him. "It is an investment in the kind of person I am proud to call family." "I did not help you to get anything in return," he insisted. "Exactly," I replied. "That is precisely why you deserve this. You gave when you thought you would never receive anything back. Everyone else withheld, despite having more than enough calculating what they might get in return someday." We talked for hours that night about his dreams he had abandoned due to financial constraints, about my plans for the future, about what constitutes a meaningful life. By dessert, he had tentatively accepted his new circumstances, though he insisted on leaving the tip a small act of independence. I understood completely. In the months that followed, I established clear structures for family financial involvement. With Martin's help, I created education funds for Ashley's children, and the children of my cousins, accessible only for verified educational expenses. For my sister, I paid off her mortgage, but kept the house in a trust that prevented its sale for profit, genuine help without enabling poor decisions. For broader family matters, I established what Martin called a family bank with formal application procedures for significant needs, medical emergencies, housing stability issues, or legitimate business ventures with sound plans. A committee, consisting of Martin, a family therapist, and myself, would evaluate requests based on merit rather than emotional manipulation. I required any family member seeking substantial assistance to complete a financial literacy course I funded through a local community college. This was not punitive, but practical. I had seen how quickly lottery winners' fortunes could disappear when distributed without wisdom. Some family relationships improved under these new parameters. Ashley and I became closer than ever, our weekly dinners evolving into genuine connection rather than obligation. Free from financial stress, she returned to school to pursue a nurse practitioner license, something she had abandoned when her children were born. Other relationships remained strained or faded entirely. Dad and Heather maintained superficial contact, but were clearly disappointed that access to my fortune came with accountability. Aunt Judith made a show of respecting my boundaries while subtly reminding me of her connections at every opportunity. We settled into a polite but distant relationship that suited us both. My own life transformed in measured steps rather than dramatic leaps. I purchased a comfortable home in a good neighborhood, not a mansion, but a place with room to grow and entertain. I continued working for 6 months after the win, transitioning my crew to a new foreman and making sure everyone was secure before I left. With Uncle Robert's encouragement, I established Foundations Construction, a small company specializing in hiring and training people transitioning from homelessness or incarceration. We focused on renovation projects for affordable housing, paying fair wages, and providing mentorship beyond job skills. The satisfaction of creating opportunity for others proved more fulfilling than the luxury purchases that tempted many new millionaires. I also established a private foundation focused on medical debt relief, remembering my own struggle after back surgery. Working with hospital systems, we developed programs to identify patients facing financial ruin from necessary medical care and quietly eliminated their debt. The money changed my external circumstances dramatically, but the test had changed something more fundamental: my understanding of human nature and the complicated ways love and self-interest intertwine in families. This knowledge proved more valuable than the millions guiding my decisions about who and what deserved my time, attention, and resources. As Uncle Robert often reminded me, during our regular fishing trips to Lake Pleasant, the money just lets you be more of who you already were, Mason. Make sure that person is someone worth being. 1 year after the revelation lunch that changed everything, I hosted a smaller gathering at my new home, a cookout for those family members who had demonstrated genuine growth in our relationships. The guest list was notably shorter than it would have been before my test, but the connections were infinitely more authentic. Ashley and her children came early to help set up. Her face relaxed in a way I had not seen in years. The weight of financial insecurity had lifted, and she had blossomed in her nurse practitioner program. Brian had not been invited. They had separated 6 months earlier, after he refused to address his gambling issues despite having every resource available to help him. Uncle Robert arrived with his new girlfriend Elaine, a kind-eyed library volunteer he had met at a community center dance. At 72, he had found unexpected romance that brought color to his cheeks and a spring to his step that had nothing to do with financial security. Ryan and Tiffany came with their respective partners, having maintained a respectful distance from my fortune while nurturing our family connection. My mother attended, subdued, but gradually rebuilding our relationship through consistent behavior rather than dramatic promises. Noticeably absent were my father and Heather, Aunt Judith, and Uncle Gregory, and Cousin Derek, all of whom had demonstrated that access to wealth remained their primary interest in maintaining contact. Their absence created space for genuine conversation and laughter that had been rare at previous family gatherings. As we sat around the fire pit that evening, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in spectacular colors, Uncle Robert raised his glass in a toast. To lessons learned, he said simply, his eyes meeting mine with understanding. The journey from that convenience store counter to this moment had been transformative in ways I could never have anticipated. The money itself had provided security and opportunity, but the test had given me something more valuable: clarity about the true nature of my relationships and the courage to reshape them based on authenticity rather than obligation. My healing journey had not been linear. There were days of anger when I scrolled through old family photos and questioned every memory. There were moments of doubt when I wondered if the test had been too harsh, too manipulative. There were nights of profound loneliness when I questioned whether genuine connection was possible in the shadow of great wealth. Working with a therapist, something I could now easily afford, had helped me process these complex emotions without becoming bitter. I learned to forgive without enabling to establish boundaries, without building walls, and to recognize that family relationships exist on a spectrum rather than in black and white categories of good or bad. Some unexpected positive outcomes had emerged from this painful process. Ashley's children now had guaranteed educational opportunities that would break the cycle of financial insecurity. My mother, though initially resistant, had embraced financial literacy education and developed healthier patterns of self-reliance. Uncle Robert's medical concerns were fully addressed for the first time in decades, adding both quality and likely years to his life. More personally, I had found purpose beyond material accumulation. Foundations Construction had grown to employ 27 people, many of whom had previously faced significant barriers to employment. Our medical debt foundation had relieved over $3 million in crushing healthcare obligations for families across Arizona. These endeavors brought satisfaction that no luxury purchase could match. New friendships had entered my life, relationships formed after my wealth was established, and therefore untainted by suspicion about motives. I had connected with other philanthropists who shared my interest in addressing systemic issues rather than just symptoms, people who measured wealth by impact rather than accumulation. As the evening wound down and guests departed with genuine hugs rather than perfunctory goodbyes, I reflected on the most valuable lessons this extraordinary year had taught me. First, money reveals character rather than building it. Those who were generous with little became more generous with much. Those who were selfish, despite having enough, became more transparently selfish when greater wealth was at stake. Second, true wealth lies in relationships where you are valued for who you are, not what you can provide. Uncle Robert's initial help came from genuine care, not calculation, the purest form of generosity. Third, boundaries are not punishments but essential frameworks for healthy relationships. Establishing clear expectations about money had actually improved several family connections by removing unspoken tensions and resentments. Fourth, forgiveness does not require forgetting or continued vulnerability. I had forgiven family members who failed my test while still making informed choices about their role in my life going forward. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, finding purpose beyond personal comfort creates the most sustainable happiness. The projects that engaged my passion and values brought far more satisfaction than the luxury purchases that had initially tempted me. The sun had fully set now, the desert night wrapping around us like a blanket. Stars emerged in the clear sky, countless points of light beyond any human's ability to count or claim. Their permanence offered perspective on our temporary concerns, even ones involving millions of dollars. You know, I said to the remaining guests gathered around the fire I thought winning the lottery would be the most significant event of my life, but it was really discovering who my people truly are, finding my real wealth. Uncle Robert nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. The money just makes you more of who you already were, he repeated his favorite wisdom. Turns out, you were already rich in the ways that matter, Mason. As we sat in comfortable silence watching the flames, I felt a peace that had nothing to do with bank accounts or investment portfolios. The painful test had led to authentic connection with fewer people but deeper meaning, a fair trade, by any measure. What would you do if you suddenly came into unexpected wealth? Would you tell everyone immediately, or would you test the waters first? Have you ever discovered someone's true character during a time of need? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to catch more real-life stories about family money and the complicated ways they intersect. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, true wealth is measured in relationships, not dollars.